Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to our March team training for teams that are in their first year of the PBIS Academy. I'm Christine Downs.
And I'm Eric Mackey.
And we're trainers for any PBIS. This presentation, like all presentations, was developed with the support of the any PBIS network. So today's training, we're going to do a very quick review of our continuum for correcting problem behaviors that we worked on last time. And then we're going to move into step 8, which is database decision making for monitoring and evaluating your PBIS practices. During this training, your team tasks will be to continue planning your system for correcting problem behaviors or adding to your action plan. Then a plan for your PBIS outcome evaluation based on data. And finally, to schedule your tiered fidelity inventory or TFI with your trainer for April or June through June. Before we move into our content, we want to share a few resources with you. PBIS Apps has a section called Teach by Design, which has lots of wonderful articles and tools. And there is a blog post called 5 Questions Every Team Should Ask About School-Wide Behavior. It's a really easy read, and it takes 5 questions about that PBIS teams should consider when they're reviewing their data for decision making. It will be really helpful. And there's a video from any PBIS. It's quite brief. It's under 11 minutes. And it's focused on 4 steps for selecting, monitoring, and evaluating your PBIS practices, which will go along with what we're talking about today. So the last time we met, we talked about building a continuum of responses for addressing problem behavior. This is basically your discipline system. And we reviewed 3 important components to developing a hierarchy of responses to behavior. Clear definitions for understanding behaviors, a discipline flowchart, and discipline referral forms. So having clear definitions for problem behaviors helps staff to be consistent in their reporting of rule violations. This in turn ensures that our data is accurate and it's measuring the same behaviors regardless which staff has reported it. You should also classify your behaviors into class managed, sometimes called minor behaviors, and office managed, sometimes called major behaviors. A discipline flowchart or a discipline level rubric helps staff to determine which responses and interventions are appropriate for different behaviors. They provide a nice visual process for responding to behaviors and how we track those behavioral incidences. Again, this leads to more consistent responses and follow through by adults. And it also can help to reduce disproportionality in your referrals. A progressive discipline model is also recommended where repeated behavior is met with increasing consequences, or it might be rooted to a more appropriate intervention within the school or even an outside agency. And lastly, it's really important to have an easy to complete office discipline referral form. Sometimes you'll hear us call it an ODR form. This continues that consistency in monitoring and recording information about problem behaviors. And it's essential for efficiently and effectively identifying patterns of misbehavior across your school or classrooms. So when you're with your team next, or if you're together now, you can pause the video and discuss where you are with your discipline system. Have you created your definitions and maybe added examples? Have you classified your behaviors into office and class managed lists? Have you created your flowchart to help staff respond to the different behaviors? And you have an office discipline form that's easy to fill out, that has limited options and gets entered into your referral management system. That might be Swiss or X2 or SchoolBrains. And consider, very importantly, how you're going to train your staff so that they know how to use these new tools and understand the new systems. You're going to need to review this with your staff yearly so that their consistency is maintained as new staff join your school. Okay, today we're going to focus on database decision-making. Focus especially on monitoring and evaluating your PBIS practices. Every team had their reasons for implementing PBIS. Some of those common reasons include improving academic performance, attendance or graduation rates, or how about improvements in your school climate, or reduction in staff turnover, or maybe you want reductions in discipline, in suspensions, or to reduce disproportionality in discipline. Whatever your reasons are, we need you to use data to determine whether you're getting the results that you want. Otherwise, why use up your valuable time and resources on establishing PBIS at your school? Right? You want to get to those really important outcomes. But what happens if you're not getting the results that you want? What are your next steps? Well, historically, it's been to toss the initiative away and start with a new one. But we know that's exhausting and inefficient, right? Instead, we need to go back and check on the fidelity on a regular basis. We need to know, are staff implementing our systems and our practices the way they're supposed to be implemented, right? If our fidelity is low, we know why we're not getting the results that we wanted. So we have to go back and work with the adults. So as a team, we want to build our routines around monitoring both implementation and the effectiveness of the implementation. We want to regularly review your implementation and the effectiveness because it will help your efforts to be linked with those meaningful outcome goals, right? It helps you to communicate the purpose and the importance of PBIS to your desired outcomes, your desired outcomes to your team and to the broader school. So if we're working on problem behaviors, we want to reduce that. Our goal is to reduce discipline problems. We're going to look at data. It's all communicated very clearly to your broader school. And it helps guide our action plan. If we're trying to reduce disproportionality, we know we want to dig into the data. We want to disaggregate it by race or ethnicity or English language learner status. And then we know on our action plans which pieces we need to implement step by step. And then finally, it helps us to demonstrate our progress. When we go back to look at our data, we can say, did this help reduce discipline referral? Did it help increase attendance? Have grades gone up? So we know, is it having an impact? And we can share that with our stakeholders.
So the basic process that you want to go through in database decision-making is first, identify what you want to know, such as are students' standardized scores getting better? Or maybe are our students receiving our acknowledgement systems? Maybe you use gotcha tickets or something along those lines. The second step is to identify what data you need to answer your questions, such as you'll probably need MCAS scores, or maybe interviews with students indicating whether they've received those gotcha tickets within, say, the past 2 months. The third step is, pardon me, we want to develop methods for collecting and analyzing the data, such as figuring out how to gather the data, where the data should be entered, and how the data can be broken down and put into charts, and who's going to be responsible for all this. And the fourth step is analyzing the data, creating hypotheses as to why certain problems exist, and developing structured plans for what should happen next, which should hopefully include a return back to the data to make sure that you're making progress. So let's take a deeper dive into each step. The first step is to figure out what you want to know. Sometimes it's helpful to think about, why did you decide to learn about PBIS? Were you concerned about office discipline referrals? Were you concerned about your climate? Maybe start there. You could also think about, what are your biggest concerns right now or during this year, or maybe thinking across years, what have been the trends? You can also think about, what are the targets for your school improvement plan or your district improvement plan, and align with those questions and targets. Here are some questions that a school may ask to evaluate the impact of their PBIS efforts. This particular school focused on the student outcomes of attendance and behavior. So for attendance, they asked the question, are students attending virtual instruction? For behavior, they asked when and where are behavioral errors occurring? And for fidelity, more broadly, they were asking, are we making progress with implementing PBIS with fidelity? We'll keep building on this example as we walk through the steps of evaluating and monitoring PBIS. The next step is to identify the information, otherwise the data, you need to answer your questions. It's easy to feel like you have to start from scratch in order to answer your evaluation question. However, schools tend to gather copious amounts of data. Your school is likely already gathering data related to your question. You may just need to do a bit of interpretation to answer your question, or you might need to adjust your data systems to get the answers that you need. Data that you can often find in schools includes grades, attendance, visits to the nurse, academic performance, and so forth. To answer some other questions, you may need to find new tools to answer them, such as a school climate survey to assess the health of your school's climate, or the tiered fidelity inventory to measure your school's fidelity to PBIS. For instance, to measure virtual attendance, you can check your school's attendance logs. For student behavioral data, you might check X2, School Brains, or Swiss. And for PBIS fidelity data, you might use the tiered fidelity inventory, which you can actually use on PBIS apps. On your own or when you're with your team next, think about what evaluation question or questions you might want to ask at the end of the year and the following year. Once you've identified your questions, generate a list of the existing data sources related to that type of question. Then identify who has access to that data. You may find that you need to get permission for your team to access that particular data. With that said, not everyone on the team needs to have access to that data. Maybe one or two people should be sufficient. The third step for selecting, monitoring, and evaluating school-wide PBIS practices is to develop the methods for collecting and analyzing the indicators you selected in step 2, such as office discipline referrals or attendance. This is where we really think through the logistics of how the data is going to be gathered. We can continue to add to our data collection plan. Back to our example, which is focused on attendance, behavior, and fidelity, you might use the attendance data that teachers are already entering and make sure that it's being reviewed daily by the school social workers to catch any truancy issues early. For behaviors, you might have teachers fill out the office discipline referrals within 24 hours, hopefully, of the incident, and have the assistant principal review the referral patterns on a weekly basis. And for fidelity to PBIS, you may plan on continuing to complete the tiered fidelity inventory, otherwise the TFI, as a team in the spring. It's important to keep these data routines brief and feasible. We often recommend that it should take no more than about 1% of each day, so about 5 minutes per day, and that the routines should be built into your already existing routines, such as morning attendance and when taking students out or sending students out for major behaviors. Finally, once you have data, you want to do something with it. Unfortunately, sometimes it's in raw form and it can be tough to interpret. So we need to make a plan to do some pre-analysis to get the data ready for review and for problem solving. Otherwise, you're going to burn a lot of time just trying to figure out what the data means. So you want to identify someone who has the time in their schedule to review that data and make sense of it before presenting it to the team. So in this example, the school social worker might analyze the attendance data ahead of a team meeting every 2 weeks or so. The team then reviews the data for problem solving and decides how best to share the data with the broader community. The same concepts and ideas apply for behavioral data and for fidelity data. The big ideas we want you to take away from this presentation are, first of all, collect data. But before you do so, identify what data is important to your team and to your school, and develop a plan for collecting and reviewing that data. The next point is present the data. Data by itself can get unwieldy and can be difficult to interpret. Summarize the data into easy to interpret graphs so that your team can make sense of the data and do so swiftly. Finally, make decisions using that data. Walk through a data-driven problem-solving process like the tips and identify what your team is going to implement at the whole school level based on the data. For example, how might you teach, how might you reinforce, and how will you respond to behavioral errors? So when you're with your team next, spend some time thinking about what outcomes or goals you'd like to examine. If you're not sure where to start, it's helpful to look at your school improvement plan or your district improvement plan. These documents can give you helpful starting points. Choosing data points that are aligned with the targets in these documents helps to keep your efforts aligned with the school and the district. Start thinking about how you would obtain and gather that data. Also, take some time to start filling out the outcome evaluation template. You can find the evaluation template in your online syllabus at nepbis.org. It's within the row for March under the activities column. Thank you for spending time with us to review the content of this session. The agenda for the April session will include an overview of assessment tools, including the tiered fidelity inventory that we mentioned so much today, the self-assessment survey. We'll also be spending some time with your team and doing some planning. Your tasks during the next meeting are to complete the team implementation checklist. And if you haven't done so already, please do so soon. Scheduling that tiered fidelity inventory. We're looking to try to get that done by the beginning of June. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.